Welcome to the Late Late Show, brought to you by. Oh, sorry. This is the 1867 Sports Show. I just think it's the Late Late Show based on how late we're starting tonight, due to some unforeseen circumstances with Small Kyle. How we doing, buddy?
Doing good there. This is where the technical difficulties little screen would come up there, and it's the dog with the electric cord in its mouth. It's unplugged something. So yeah, no, we're burning the midnight oil here, bud. How you doing?
Good, man. We're burning the midnight oil because we're on episode number Mika Kiprasov tonight. But anyways, we usually
Only
start
David
off.
Ortiz was Canadian there. We
If
could
only
have.
David Ortiz was Canadian, not to say Mika Kiprasov was Canadian, but of course, great Calgary Flames goaltender. Had to show him some respect. But the reason why we wanted to start off with Mika Kiprasov with the Calgary Flames connection is obviously over the last week there's been an unforeseen tragedy that's happened in the hockey and sports world with the Gaudreau brothers, who were unfortunately killed in a drive-by accident on the highway. So, I mean, this is one of those things that you never want to see. Everyone's kind of been talking about how great the Gaudreau brothers are in the hockey and sports community. Just very giving, very very much role models for what you want to see professional athletes be. And I mean, the reason why I wanted to talk about it today, because I mean, everybody's kind of been, chiming in with their take on the matter. And obviously we won't dive into the semantics of it, but we've kind of seen the hockey and sports world really kind of rally around this, situation and support the Gaudreau family, kind of how we expected them to. You know, People lose sight of the fact that there's a lot of good that comes with professional sports. There's a lot of good that comes with sports in general. But I think with everything that you're seeing now, with the outpouring of support, with the financial support is probably the best way to put it. That a lot of his former teammates or their former teammates have been putting into supporting not only Johnny but Matthew's side of the family and their young children that are on the way. It's just been it's kind of a don't want to say a silver lining, but it's one of those things where it kind of gets unforeseen, unseen, unless something like this happens, and a tragedy has kind of brought everyone together. So, again, your take on it. You've been involved in the sports world for a long time. It's unfortunate that it takes something like this to really bring people together, but that's kind of what we're seeing right now with the Gaudreau situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, absolute all the love in the world going out to that family because, they're for their sister's wedding, right? And this happens. And so can only imagine what the entire Gaudreau clan is kind of going through right now. And like you said, the outpouring of support and solidarity, not only from the hockey community, but from just the broader sports fan community has been nice to see, right? And I think it is something that a lot of sports fans take for granted, right? Because it's easy, especially in today's day and age, when you see like, oh, Steph Curry just signed for $62 million for one season, right? Like to almost dehumanize these people or lose sight of the fact that they're not just figures or characters that show up on your TV. Like there is a life that goes on outside of sports. It's not like it's a Netflix show and oh, season 8 just wrapped up. Wonder if the Sens can get it together next season. But
Yeah,
it's very much something that is a stark reminder of the human element of the game, and that once that final whistle, buzzer, horn, whatever goes, that these guys and girls have to go back to their families and live normal lives. And there's stuff that goes on well beyond, the scoreboard, dropping their kids off at school. And they're still, help teaching their kids to learn to ride a bike and all the things that average Joes and Jills across the country are doing with their own families. And so just because someone has, the good fortune of playing a professional sport for a living. And, I think for 99% of those athletes out there, they'll tell you, what a privilege it is to be able to play the game that they love and be rewarded handsomely as a result of it. But yeah, it's such a bigger takeaway from any kind of loss that the Columbus Blue Jackets suffered. Like, this is a human life that was tragically cut short, and our hearts and everything go out to the Gaudreaus during this tough time.
Yeah, and obviously we talk about it from the athlete perspective, but even looking at it from a fan perspective, I think one of the most unique situations you can see is kind of what's been happening at the Saddle Dome, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, Johnny Gaudreau played much of his professional career with the Calgary Flames, um, and you're seeing, people showing up in Flames jerseys, in Oilers jerseys, in Canucks jerseys, in Maple Leafs jerseys, and they're all kind of banding together, and they're showing the love, towards this family and the NHL community in general. And you're seeing the flowers, people are painting murals, on the sidewalk, and kind of donating them to charity that goes towards the family. And I mean, this is the type of thing where, again, you don't see it unless some type of tragedy happens. So yeah, the human element is such a big thing that kind of gets missed along the way with sports in general, but let's just focus on the professional side of it. And the fact that everyone can kind of check themselves, at the door, regardless of where you're from, who you cheer for, how much money you're making, where your alliances are, you can kind of all come together, as one group, when something like this does occur. So yeah, I mean, this is just it takes a bad thing to show the good in people,
Mhm.
right? And it's probably the best way to put it. But
Yeah,
you know,
before we put a bow on that there, just because you brought it up, and for those that follow the Dine Sports Twitter account, we already posted it up there. But again, her name's Lindsay Hamilton. Her social handles are at Liz17. Liz has 5 Z's in it. But you can look her up. She is a very talented artist who is actually doing a Gaudreau painting and is putting it up for auction. And all the proceeds are going to go to support Gaudreau's family there. So go and check her out on social media if you do want to kind of help support or show some love that way as well too.
is she the one that's doing it with the puck?
I don't know if she's doing it with a puck. Let me zoom in on this here slightly more. No, she's
Because
using a paintbrush.
okay, because there is an artist who's doing a mural solely with a puck,
Yeah.
and it's the coolest thing you'll ever see. But yeah, anyways, great, great cause that obviously this talented artist is putting her work towards. So yeah, go support that for sure. But yeah, moving on to happier side of the game. Um, yeah, we'll stay in Alberta, and pretty big extension was signed this morning uh, with a pretty prominent player for the Edmonton Oilers. And a lot of
Dan
people are
Bowman
saying,
got an extension already.
yeah, Stan Bowman is going to be there for the rest of his life. But anyways, everyone has been kind of saying, well, what's going to happen now that kind of the dust has settled on the Stanley Cup run between Leon Draisaitl, Connor McDavid? Are they going to sign on for the long haul? Are they going to look elsewhere? What's going to happen with these guys? Well, one of the dominoes dropped this morning with Leon Draisaitl signing the richest contract in NHL history, an 8-year extension with an average of $14 million a season. So, Kyle, initial thoughts on the Draisaitl extension and what it means for Edmonton and the rest of these top NHL elite players that are going to be free agents in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that if you're an Oilers fan, you're obviously thrilled about it, but it's also something that that front office had to do, right? Like, he's not someone that you wanted to have play out the final season of his contract and let's talk to him in the summer and see how things lie at that point, right? So it's a tidy piece of business. I mean, everyone kind of figured that number was going to be right up there with the, Austin Matthews of the world and all of that. So again, am I going to lose sleep over it if I was an Oilers fan? No. Am I feeling the greatest about your cap situation? Meh. You kind of already had your offer sheet woes happen this summer. And you know what? If you can lock up a player of Draisaitl's ilk, you do it every day of the week and then kind of deal with the repercussions down the road here. With the cap going up and, league revenues finally starting to trend in the positive direction, which would suggest that even future caps will continue to rise here post pandemic. I don't think it's going to be something that ages poorly, where all of a sudden 2 years go by and oh, there's a cap shrink all of a sudden, and now that's an albatross. How do we move it? Because the production is there as well too. Like this isn't someone who it's oh he scored 70 points last season. We're projecting into the future and hope that he can one day eclipse 100, and then the contract will be worthwhile, right? This is someone who's been doing it at a very, very high clip for
Yeah.
multiple seasons now. So again, bodes well for them. Does it move the needle on making McDavid want to go out and re-sign a lifetime Oilers contract? Probably not, but it doesn't hurt either, right? Like this is something that if you're an Oilers fan, you are slowly becoming Toronto West, though, is the one kind of, cautionary tale I'll throw up there in the sense of you look at what Bouchard's making, you look at what Draisaitl's making, you look at what McDavid's making, and even throw in Darnell Nurse in there as well, too. Right? Like it's pretty expensive core four right there. And we've seen how that story has played out with the Toronto Maple Leafs in the postseason. So not saying they're identical, but there's some breadcrumbs there that, at the end of the day, I think the fact that this offseason kind of showed that some guys will take a little bit of a discount to play with McJesus out in Alberta there. So that is working well for you. But all it takes is, one first round playoff exit. You're the belle of the ball right now, having been to the Cup final game 7 so close. If you guys fizzle out next season or even the season after that, suddenly those hometown discounts might not be coming in, and then you lose that depth, and now suddenly you are exceptionally top heavy like a Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah. And, obviously, I think people are going to resonate towards the Toronto comparison because of the very high level contracts that are being given out to the top, 4, 5, 6 players on that roster. But the way I look at it, and again, I'm taking off my Homer glasses here, even though I've got some some blue light glasses on. This is
can't be getting those wrinkles under the eyes there. We got
no,
some photo shoots
not.
coming up, eh?
Absolutely not. I got to keep them fresh. But no, I look at this situation and I really look at what Stan Bowman is looking at. Right, where was he before this? Chicago, right? During Chicago's run, who was the team in the East that had a very prominent, cup contender every single season? The Pittsburgh Penguins. How were those two teams constructed? Drafted homegrown players who developed into high-level elite, all-stars.
Yeah. What doesn't hurt either is, at least in both your case and the Penguins' case,
having the top picks
generational talent. But it doesn't hurt to get a generational talent. But I was even going to say just up the middle, right? Because you look at what the Leafs did. You're handing out huge contracts to wingers, and right, at least strength up the middle there. Yeah. But continue. I see where you're going here.
Yeah, and again, I'll use Pittsburgh as a comparison because you look at how long they've been sustainable, right? Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang. When you could throw Marc-Andre Fleury, Jordan Staal in there if you want, but let's just see the core three. You've got two centermen who were arguably two of the top 3 players at their position in the entire league.
Mm-hmm.
Both making top contracts, right? You've got a defenseman who's an offensive defenseman who developed into quite the two-way player, who is also making one of the highest, highest AAV contracts for defensemen in the NHL. They were able to insulate young, talented, hungry players around that group because of the talent and leadership that those players possessed. You look at what Toronto's doing, you just hit the nail on the head. Handing out big contracts doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best player for your scenario. Because looking at that John Tavares contract, great player, but you're paying him for what he did, not for what he was going to give you, right? The story was great. Coming back home to be the captain of his favorite team when he was a kid. Well, handing out an $11 million contract for something like that doesn't necessarily, put you in a good position, right? Then you find yourself in the situation of, oh, we've got these very talented wingers in Mitch Marner and William Nylander that just so happen, to want these large contracts because they see what their friend Austin Matthews is making as one of these top level centermen. Well, what's happened with that situation now? Mitch Marner disappears in the playoffs. William Nylander probably could have signed him to a cheaper deal, 2-3 years ago, had you foreseen this boost in production that he was, going to get. But now you're in a situation where you've absolutely hamstrung yourself. With Edmonton, where I see them going with this, and again, this leads into my second point, because you mentioned that does this move the needle for Rick David signing his extension? You say maybe not. I think it does, because if you look at the relationship between Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, these guys are best friends. Their wives are best friends. Like, these guys, I think, are joined at the hip, much like you saw a Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane back in the Chicago heyday, right? And again, you take the Pittsburgh situation, look at Chicago. Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, best friends making top-level contracts, but they're going to be your leaders because they're in their prime. You've got an offensive defenseman who turns into a solid two-way defender who ended up becoming a Norris Trophy winner, Duncan Keith. There's a lot of similarities with this Edmonton Oilers team with these top guys, plus a guy like Evan Bouchard, who seems to be taking that next step up to being that two-way defender, who's going to be an elite defenseman.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for you to sprinkle in the LA Kings at some point here and just make the full gamut of all the mini dynasties of the last 20 years here. Look at my beloved Edmonton Oilers and what we've become. We're knocking on the door.
Yeah, and again, like, all of them are kind of built very similarly, but those are the two teams when I look at what they're trying to do, I think is kind of where they're going. Because a lot of their players that they brought back are veterans. That's what these teams like Pittsburgh and Chicago did. They brought in young guys to fill kind of the core with cheap contracts, but they also brought in these savvy veterans who were great two-way players, maybe not going to score 100 points a season, but they're going to give you 50 to 60 points and provide that secondary scoring for you when it matters. So the way that it's constructed, I think, is good. Obviously, this all hinges on Stuart Skinner, right? So these, not to take anything away from, the Draisaitl signing, but I think where you're seeing this go is McDavid's probably going to be next with this contract. But again, where does this contract put McDavid's? Because if you're saying Leon Draisaitl is worth $14 million a season, highest paid player in league history, well, Connor McDavid's got a very good case here to ask for somewhere around $17-18 million if he really wants to. And again, he's worth it. Pay him $20 million. He's worth it. This is the type of player that he is. So is this going to, on paper, ruin, your cap situation for the next, 5-10 years? Probably. But you've also got Jack Campbell's contract coming off the books soon. I'm sure that there's a buyout clause somewhere in that Darnell Nurse albatross where you can get out from underneath that giant cap hit and gradually pay him out, right? Then you're looking at a lot of the guys who are making these top level contracts on the Oilers that are going to be retiring in the next few years. So now you're clearing up even more space. So again, not to say that it's going to be a good thing for the next 15 to 20 years of this franchise, because it's not. But when you're in this window where you've got these elite level players in their primes, you keep them happy, you give them the contracts that they need to become that lifer that you want, because this is where Edmonton kind of lost their dynasty, in the 80s. It was Gretzky, then it was Curry, then it was Messier, then Coffey, like all of these guys left, and then what were you left with the 90s? Anyway, any Edmonton Oilers fan will tell you, being an Oilers fan in the 90s was not fun. So if you can keep these guys around and make it so that way there's a culture that's been set and will continue to progress and get better, you're only going to bring success to your franchise for a long term. So that to me is kind of where it stands. It's great in the sense that Draisaitl is going to be there for 8 years. It's also great because of the domino effect that this is going to lead to. So here's hoping that this extension looks, very good on paper the next 2-3 years.
Yeah, if only there were a website that people could go to look up what buyout clauses were. But alas, thank you very much, Washington Capitals, for taking that away from us there and cap friendly.
You know what we can do? Dine Sports should pick up the mantle.
Here we go.
We're going to create our own salary cap management site.
Yeah, we'll integrate it into the CFL's live stats tracking. There, it'll be a one-stop shop. It's gonna be great. 2 birds, 1 stone.
It's gonna be the best hybrid site you've ever seen.
Yeah, but I mean, we talked about the human element there too, and like you were alluding to, there's absolutely zero chance that Draisaitl signs this contract without having at least a beer with McDavid, being like, "Hey, if I'm, hitching my wagon to this train here for the next 8 years, what are your plans?" So again, bodes well, but at the same time too, there's something to be said about being the unquestioned number 1 player on the planet. And when it comes time to what's best for me and my family, because like you said, whether he wants 18, 19, $20 million, he goes to open market. I've got 32 NHL franchises who are pretty much set to open up the vault and pay him whatever he wants. So it is going to be, I think, regardless of him coming back, regardless of what happens with the other contracts, it's still like we got to woo him a little bit. And how do you woo him? That's by going on deep playoff runs here. And good thing you got cousin Jeff joining cousin Stu out there to settle the boys down a little bit.
The Skinners are just taking over Edmonton, and they're going to lead them to their first cup since 1990. But yeah, as long as I was going to say, if St. Louis happens to offer sheet Connor McDavid, I will lose my absolute marbles. But anyways, I digress. Speaking of extensions, another prominent Canadian athlete, because again, he was born in Canada, but top level player for a Canadian franchise is going to be up for an extension very, very soon. Should have signed it already, but as we've seen in Edmonton, management seems to get in their own way and trips over their own shoelaces. Of course, we're talking about Vladdy Guerrero Jr. in the Toronto Blue Jays. So this has been bandied about probably since last year. When is Vladdy going to sign his extension? He's saying all the right things. He wants to be in Toronto. We covered it about 15 episodes ago, where we said, you know what? He came out and said that, he wants to be here, but he understands it's a business and he's going to go play where he's wanted, which again, any player is going to want to say. But at the end of the day, he wants to be in Toronto. The fans want him in Toronto. The teammates want him in Toronto. What's the holdup here, Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro? Like, after last offseason, do you not think that locking up your own homegrown star player is probably going to buy you a little bit of grace with the fan, with the ownership group? Like, this is the type of thing that pisses people off more than anything. When you kick your heels and just kind of say, yeah, it'll happen. It'll happen. It'll happen. But next year, we're going to go after Juan Soto. Don't worry, we're going to go after him. Listen, you invested all this time and money to try and lure Shohei Ohtani there. You did your best. Obviously, you're not going to match a $70 million a year contract. Pretty much impossible. You've got a guy sitting in your clubhouse who is on an absolute heater right now. And again, we can mention this. If you sign him 3 months ago, what's that contract look like? Probably a lot less than what it looks like right now, because no one has been a hotter bat right now in Major League Baseball than Vladdy Guerrero Jr. So this is a situation where Vladdy Guerrero Jr. is going to get a huge contract, whether that's through an extension with the Toronto Blue Jays or if he hits the free agent market. What do you think that contract looks like when Vladdy Guerrero Jr. eventually gets that huge extension?
Yeah. Well, number one, you start off with the richest contract in Toronto Blue Jays franchise history. That's your starting point right there. What concerns me about the how this process has unfolded here, right, is all the talk of yeah, we're gonna go after Juan Soto and we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. That's great, but we've seen how you guys cannot seem to juggle two priorities at once last off season. So why don't we get Vladdy done first?
Hmm.
Then you can go after the big fish here. Because again, I think there's going to be a lot more off-season business than maybe the casual fan kind of realizes in Blue Jays land here, right? This is a roster who, again, you just ostensibly gutted and have replaced with a slew of prospects. Now, some of them are playing exceptionally well, but we've also seen that movie before too, where Davis Schneider looked like the second coming of friggin' Cal Ripken Jr. At one point last season and has kind of settled into who he's always kind of been at the minor league levels at this point.
I mean, he's batting a very, very robust 195 right now.
Yeah, well, there you go. You know what they say: if you can hit your body weight, you're doing all right. So, again, it's one of those things where they've got so many prospects up right now that they need to look at who's a flash in the pan versus who's part of our legitimate long-term plan. Because it doesn't matter how many prospects you have there, not all of them are ever going to contribute to your major league roster. Some of them are going to be lifer farmhands who toil away in the minors. Some are going to be packaged at next year's trade deadline for something else. But what you need to put yourself in is a position to contend so that you are buyers at next season's trade deadlines as opposed to sellers like you were this time. So again, that all comes back to inking Vladdy to a very lucrative deal. And I think if you've looked at some of the figures that have been buoyed about there, I don't think it's crazy to say somewhere north of 300 million could be on the table here. Then you look at the fact that, well, sounds like Bichette is slowly packing his suitcase
You
one
know,
item at a time here. And he's probably going to need to either have a come to Jesus moment and get on the same page with this Blue Jays front office, or he's going to be shipped out in relatively short order as well, too. Again, a homegrown young talent who I think with a change of scenery can really turn his career around and be a contributor for another major league team and do very, very well for the rest of his career. But that's another big piece of business that isn't going to get done overnight. So, leaving all of these little things, the talent evaluation of the minor league players who are up there because you got no one else on your major league roster anymore. You've got the Vladdy contract. You've got a Bo Bichette, which you're not going to take the first offer that comes out there. You're going to take that and leverage it with about six other conversations. So that's again another time consuming thing. And oh, by the way, we're going to be meeting one of 30 that Juan Soto's camp is going to be having this offseason. Like you can see how this offseason could get away from this front office based on their track record. And all of a sudden it turns into we got 75 cents on the dollar for Bichette. Vladdy signed, like a bridge deal or something like that, or
yeah.
didn't sign at all. And our roster's still in flux. And by the way, we missed out on Juan Soto as well, too. So this is not insignificant because the only chance you have at signing Juan Soto is the fact that him and Vladdy are good friends off the field and have openly talked about how one day they want to play to get with one another. Now, if you don't take care of Vladdy, that might be in pinstripes in New York, the two of them doing that. So again, you're doing yourself a favor by taking care of business. And like you already said, I would have already taken care of this because he would have been a hell of a lot cheaper when he was shaking off the rust in April and May than the absolute heater he's been on to close the season. So take care of Vladdy, then put all your eggs into internal talent evaluation. All right, who's staying, who's going? Is Bichette really expendable, or is it going to be something that we need to get his immediate replacement back in whatever deal we make there? And then you can go after Juan Soto. But Blue Jays have a bit of a history of not prioritizing things in the right order.
100%. I mean, it doesn't matter what regime is in charge. It just seems to be a recurring record over and over and over again. You've got these all-world talents that you let linger too long before you lock them up. and then you have to panic trade them out the door, much like the Roy Halladay return, much like losing Carlos Delgado to free agency, much like trading Sean Green for an aging Raul Mondesi back in the day. Like, these are all moves that set franchises back so much. So 100% agree with you what you're saying. Vladimir Guerrero.
What a rough time in Toronto sports when it was literally within a small window of time. Sean Green's getting traded out of there. Vince Carter's getting traded out of there.
Yeah.
And it's these aging vets who don't even want to be there that are coming back on the other end.
It was not easy to be a Toronto sports fan in those days, because I mean, the Leafs were kind of decent, but they were losing in the playoffs every time they beat the Senators.
I was going to say,
lose in the second round.
First of all, they were guaranteed a first. You want to talk about getting out of the first round? Match him up with the Ottawa Senators there.
Golf clap to the Ottawa Senators in the 2000s for just providing the Leafs fans with a little bit of hope back then. That was a very
I will not.
It was a very sarcastic golf
Kyle,
clap.
what's the sound of one hand clapping?
But anyways, yeah, very sad time for Toronto sports. But I mean, you look at what the Raptors are doing right now. They just locked up all their young core so that way they can build something. If the Blue Jays don't see that this is how you have to do things in today's, professional sport landscape, then you're doomed. Like, you're not the Yankees. You're not the Dodgers. You can't go buy every free agent that is out there because you have the available resources and players want to come play for you. That's just the reality of it.
Let me throw this at you here. If the Blue Jays do let Vladdy walk and they don't get it done, what is their team identity? Like, jokes aside here, if Vladimir Guerrero is removed, who are their foundational pieces that you build around?
I mean, that's when you're looking at the scrappy upstart team. Like, that's going to be their moniker, right?
Will Wagner is our new chosen golden boy here.
I mean, the way he's swinging the bat, hey, if he keeps that up, he can absolutely be, a very good building block. But I mean, that's their identity, the scrappy underdog. They're the Oakland Athletics, who, even though their owner's trying to, do everything he can to gut their roster and whatnot, they're still showing up and playing ball, with everything that they've got, right? So, it's one of those situations where, again, the Vlad Guerrero Jr. contract has to be the first thing to get done. And I mean, if you're talking about numbers, you have to be looking in the 8 to 10 year range. The guy's still only 25 years old. He's got the world ahead of him in regards to where his career can go. So, I mean, you get him in there until he's 34, 35. And again, if he's DHing and playing first base, we've seen these guys play until they're, late 30s, early 40s. So this could be a scenario where Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is breaking records as a member of the Toronto Blue Jays because he's been there for so long. So you kind of mentioned it already. I think that the starting point with where Vlad's camp is probably going to right now is going to be in that $32 to $35 million range. So if you had done it back in April or May, when you should have done it, you're probably looking in the 25 to 27 range. Now, that's another $10 million a season. If you're looking at it that way, over the course of 10 years, you've just cost yourself $100 million because of, kicking your tires, right?
So I liken it a little bit to, if you want a comparable here, right? Kind of the Bryce Harper contract as far as 13 years, $330 million. But I think just because salaries have gone up, right? I think it'll probably be, instead of 13 years, the ask might be, 9-10 years at 330 or something in that range, where you're looking at, like you were saying, between 30 to 35 million a season. I think, the initial ask will probably be closer to 40 million, and then the Blue Jays will counter with 25, and then they ultimately meet somewhere in the mushy middle there. But it's absolutely, it's got to be term, and I think it's north of 300 million to whoever wants to start that bidding process.
And on that note, I mean, you kind of mentioned a few different interesting things there, because I 100% agree. There's 3 phases of your offseason that you have to worry about. We've already talked about the Vladimir Guerrero signing. It has to happen, number one. Until that happens, you can't do anything. Once that happens, now you look at the other disgruntled star we mentioned, Bo Bichette. I mean, obviously the season hasn't panned out the way that Bo Bichette has wanted. I think everyone would admit that, including Bo Bichette. But these types of players don't grow on trees.
Mm-hmm.
The guy regularly is hitting around 300, either above or below. He's good for 20 home runs a season. He's going to get on base consistently. He's got a great eye at the plate. His defense is suspect, but again, you're not paying him for his defense. You're paying him for his bat. So if you look at the market for shortstops, a shortstop who's 25, 26 years old, who's just coming into the prime of his career, who's already established himself as a 300 hitter at the major league level, that guy's not going to be cheap. And I mean, any team who's smart knows that his, even though he's had a down season, his market's still going to be very hot if he ever gets put on the trading block. So I think with Toronto, that's absolutely best case scenario because one, if he's not happy, he's not going to perform well for you. And two, this is the time where you can actually get a maximum return for a player as opposed to what you're used to, which is just collecting pennies on the dollar just to get him out of town. So again, we mentioned him on the show before, but you've still got Aurelvis Martinez. And once he gets his situation cleared up with the suspension, and hopefully he's not taking the same medication that he was taking last time that got him in trouble. But there's a guy who can slide in to be that Bo Bichette replacement at shortstop. And then you can look at, we're not trading for specific positions. We're trading for return, right? Whether that be prospects, whether that be established players, whatever you think is going to take you to the next level, you have to make that trade because they're saying all these things of, we're competing in 2025. We're not throwing in the towel. We're going to be in this position. And I mean, they say that and everyone kind of laughed and said, yeah, whatever. You just gutted your team. The Toronto Blue Jays have been one of the best teams in baseball since the trade deadline. So, I mean, who would have thought that would have happened? And now these guys are probably saying, see, we told you. But this is a scenario where you can expedite that and actually compete because now you're getting in players who are ready to come in and be a part of your future and present. And then once you have your superstar locked up, you've gotten a good return for your second superstar. The third aspect of that offseason now becomes who's the big fish in the market because we're all in now because we've had a positive momentum shift and we missed out on Shohei Ohtani last year. If Juan Soto's there, hey, what's it going to take for you to come in and be not the Robin to Guerrero's Batman? This is going to be like the tag team champions of the world. Do you want to ride Aaron Judge's shadow for the rest of your career? Or do you want to be the face of a country along with one of your friends? Right? So again, how they get the pitch done, I don't care. But if you can get that done where you get Vladdy, you trade Bo for assets that are going to help your franchise now and in the future, and then you get a guy like a Juan Soto, that makes up for this absolutely failed disaster that has been the 2024 offseason and ensuing season. So let's just get the Vladdy thing done first, and then we can focus on the other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And, my last 2 cents there is, again, take it for what it's worth, but I've been hearing a lot of chatter out on the West Coast there that if Bichette is moved, expect one of those 4 California kind of West Coast teams, as far as the Angels, Dodgers, Giants, or Padres, they are all heavily interested in bringing him out there. And all of them, everyone always, craps on the Dodgers for, they just buy players, this, that. They've actually got a very, very strong track record of developing top end talent. So it's not like their cupboard is bare and it would have to be a straight cash or, an aging veteran coming back. Those are some clubs who still have some high end prospects that they could be parting ways with there, especially the Angels, who have promoted aggressively from their farm system and have some early 20 somethings that could be coming back that are already having some major league experience under their belt.
Well, again, we wait with bated breath because I think the collective fan base of the Blue Jays are just waiting for anything to happen that's positive. So
Gonna bring Freddie Freeman back in the Dodgers trade or what?
You know, I think at this point of his career, not really, something that should be done. But again, the reason why we should talk about Freddie Freeman is because is there a more unheralded superstar in Major League Baseball than Freddie Freeman?
Has he officially taken up Joey Votto's mantle of like most underappreciated NL star that just flies under the radar, but continually hits like 30 plus home runs, 100 plus RBIs, and over 300 every single season?
I'm starting to see a conspiracy here that I think because of their country of origin, it's really, putting them down on the totem pole of, who's the elite player in the MLB. So, for those of you who don't know, Freddie
Wow.
Freeman is actually half Canadian.
Yeah. I
You
was
know,
gonna say the face of MLB. He's not Japanese or anything like that.
yeah,
There.
yeah. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, Freddie Freeman is actually half Canadian. He's represented Canada many a time on the international level, um, and actually identifies, as a Canadian athlete. So, the reason why we want to talk about Freddie Freeman is because if you're not plugged in, and as a Dodger fan, would you even know that Freddie Freeman exists based on all the media coverage that's paid to Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Clayton Kershaw, and that bandy of absolute all-star roster that is the LA Dodgers?
Yeah, he's absolutely the most unassuming person. Like even talk to him in post game interviews and all of that, and it's you can tell that there's a little bit of maple syrup flowing through those veins because it's very similar to what we say. It's the aw shucks and team first and pucks in deep style kind of comments to the media. He doesn't go out there and give you all the sound bites that some other players are more apt to do. And so again, I think that's kind of his sweet spot though as well too. Is this is a guy who is just a baseball junkie who would if if he could show up to the ballpark and get paid a decent salary, doesn't have to be the hundreds of millions of dollars he's made over his career, but a decent salary and play in front of no fans and just do it for love of the game, he would probably do that in a heartbeat, right? He's not someone who's out there trying to promote my own brand and I've got 6 podcasts and my own signature liqueur and I'm like he
he,
just goes.
he he's the anti Patrick Beverly.
Yeah. He just goes out there and does his thing and does it at such an exceptionally high level. But that's also why a place like LA is so attractive to him because off the field, 1,000,001 celebrities that, people can glob onto. On the field, he's like the 5th, 6th most famous person on his own team. So he can kind of just blend in. And it's almost similar to how some players, whether they're Canadian or not, are willing to go and play in markets like Nashville, like Florida, like Tampa Bay, like all these other markets, even when they weren't perennial contenders, because being in a fishbowl in Toronto or Montreal, where everywhere you go, you're being swarmed and the media is, analyzing everything you do to death. There's something to be said about just being able to show up to the ballpark, swing a bat, and go home to your family at the end of the day.
Yeah, and speaking of family, I mean, when he had to take some time away from the team to look after his son who was going through some health issues, you really saw this stacked Dodger team kind of take that nosedive to mediocrity because they didn't have their leader.
Mhm.
And that's you talk to any player who plays in that team, they all say like Freddie Freeman's kind of the straw that stirs our drink here, right? And again, you look at his stats, you're gonna say, man, I didn't know that he was hitting over 300 again. I didn't know that he had over 20 home runs. I didn't know that he was on pace for another 100 RBI season. The guy leads the league in doubles every year. The guy is surprisingly fast. He steals 15, 20 bases every year. So
Surprisingly spry for a
it's
larger fella.
surprisingly spry. Yeah. And I mean, you look at his defense at first base. I mean, you're not going to find, a more steady first baseman than Freddie Freeman. I mean, this guy is a legit 5 tool player, maybe 4.5, taking away the speed a little bit. But yeah, Freddie Freeman is the reason why teams like Atlanta and the Dodgers have success. He's the type of superstar that you want to have on your team because he doesn't command these top level contracts that's going to, break your salary cap in half. He doesn't demand the spotlight that's going to cause that rift in a clubhouse. He provides the leadership to these young players who come up and, they follow his lead and become these superstars. You talk with that Atlanta roster right now, the Ozzy Albies, the Ronald Acuñas, like any of those guys who are, at the top of their game right now, I'll guarantee you they'll say the first guy that showed us how to do things and become a major league player was Freddie Freeman. Mm-hmm. So, let's get a golf clap for Freddie because I wanted to mention him on this show because, no one talks about him. The guy is an absolute stud ball player. And you're 100% right. I think he's taken up the mantle of the most unassuming, absolute star baseball player since Joey Votto in his prime. So let's get another golf clap for Freddie. But
steady Freddie.
Steady Freddie. And speaking of steady, Bo Levi Mitchell.
I was wondering how you're going to tie that into this next
Bo
one.
Levi Mitchell for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Not sure if you watched the Labor Day games this past weekend, Kyle, but Hamilton surprised everyone and actually got a win against Toronto.
Is it the dead cat bounce?
In the first installment of the Toronto Hamilton rivalry series. So Bo Levi Mitchell's record on Labor Day games with Calgary and now Hamilton is now 7-0 as a starting quarterback, which that's pretty impressive because you think about those rivalry games, they're not easy to win, especially because you're not playing at home all the time. You're always alternating where it is. And anyone who used to watch those Calgary Edmonton battles back in the day, they're pretty physical. So the fact that he was able to make it through a lot of those games and finish them out, pretty impressive in his own right. But 7-0. He's now being called Mr. Labor Day, which I don't know if that's a good nickname or not, but the fact that he's being associated with something as synonymous as Labor Day in the CFL is pretty special. On that note, I was thinking about this because obviously you got Mr. October with Reggie Jackson, right? Some players just kind of step up when, a certain time of year hits, a certain game hits, whatever it may be. These players elevate their game. Is there a Canadian player or a player for a Canadian team who you remember and you kind of associate with this person's going to step up at this time because that's what they always do?
Well, if you're going to start with certain scenarios and someone always stepping up, you got to start with Mr. Game 7, Justin Williams himself, who didn't realize, not that far from here, Cobourg, Ontario.
Yep.
Look at him go.
Yep.
But, ended up 9 Game 7s and won 8-1 in them. And I think his one loss was towards the tail end of his career when he was very close to retirement. So we could almost scrub that from the records there. But, I mean, if you're going to be associated with any kind of postseason accolade, like, other than Mr. Championship, like Mr. Game 7 is pretty high up there in terms of enviable nicknames because he just continually came through, whether it was with Washington, whether it was with LA, like everywhere he went. It wasn't like he was just on this dynastic run and he was just happened to be riding Ovi's coattails or anything. Like he did it at multiple stops and he was able to elevate his game and not just be part of the process, but produce in those games as well too, with timely goals and assists and OT winners and everything in between.
Yeah, no, Justin Williams is, I think, definitely on the mind of everyone who thinks of if something's going to happen, this guy's going to make it happen. Flies under the radar quite a bit, a la Freddie Freeman, but you put him in a big game scenario, you're 100% right. That goal is being scored by Justin Williams. That play is being made by Justin Williams. Any Kings or Canes fan obviously knows how special that guy was in the prime of his career. Mine is kind of a sentimental one because, again, I mentioned it already. Being an Oilers fan in the 90s was so difficult that you always just wanted the players to have some type of success. Most of the time, it happened at something like the World Championships, right? Players on teams who don't make the playoffs, they go represent their countries at the World Championships, and obviously compete for a gold medal there. Captain Canada, Ryan Smith, my all-time favorite Edmonton Oiler, played for some of the worst teams in Edmonton Oiler history. But you put him on Team Canada at those World Championships, and you name a better player who can elevate his game at the world stage than Ryan Smith. Grinding, playing against the opposing team's top line, scoring big goals. He scored multiple overtime game winners for them. This guy elevated his game every single year he was there because he was there every single year, with Edmonton either missing the playoffs or losing in the first round. So the fact that Ryan Smith was just such a great player at that level really kind of put him on the map for other people who weren't fans of Edmonton, to see how good of a hockey player he was. And he kind of got lost in the shuffle. But that to me, Ryan Smith was definitely, it made me happy being an Edmonton fan, watching him succeed on the international stage. And I don't know if you have another one, but I was thinking about another one.
I've got one other one. It's actually a recent one here as well, too. And that is our good friend, soon to be joining the NBA, Mr. Zach Edey, who for a while was known as Mr. March, not because of good things, but because Purdue historically had a bit of a penchant for bowing out early in the March Madness tournament. And for those that know, obviously, once the Final Four kind of kicks off, it's usually first week of April. It's usually like 4th to 6th weekend type thing. So it was almost a backhanded compliment, not just that, Purdue was always in March Madness, they were always ranked highly, but Mr. March can't get to April. So for him to have gone on his final run, deep into March Madness this year and kind of shaking that label as he was able to now move on to the professional ranks there, that's got to feel a little bit satisfying, because he was not a, one and done, I'm at Purdue for one season and then I'm moving on. Like, National Player of the Year, back-to-back years, was there for some very, what's the word I'm looking for here? Interesting's too bland. Volatile, maybe. Boilermakers teams, because they had some top end talent that came out of Purdue during his time there, but they could just never seem to all get on the same page. And they ended up bowing out super early the season before last March Madness, and for them to have been able to right the ship, he says, I'm coming back for another year, and they do go on that run. Quick little golf clap for him for shaking the Mr. March moniker there.
Yeah. I've got 2 honorable mentions before I get into my second one. But, Marty Jelena, again, you talk about Justin Williams kind of turning up his game at the right time. Marty Jelena scored so many big goals in the playoffs, and you would never know who he was unless you were a fan of the team he was playing for. The guy would get 30 to 40 points a year. But if you needed a big goal in the playoffs, Marty Jelena was doing it, especially on that, Calgary Flames Cup run in 2004. Mm-hmm. I think he scored about half their game-winning goals that year. So honorable mention to Marty Jelena. And again, I'd be remiss if I didn't honorable mention, Mr. Joe Carter for the Toronto Blue Jays back-to-back World Series run. I think every big hit, every big home run was Joe Carter. You look at who touched the ball last in both World Series. Joe Carter caught the ball at first base to get Otis Nixon out to win their first World Series in 1992. Joe Carter hit the game-winning home run off Mitch Williams in 1993 to win the World Series. So, not saying that people got it wrong, but how he did not win one MVP in either of those seasons is kind of a travesty to me. But anyways, my pick for my second, showing up when it matters type of athlete, I think he's probably close to calling it quits right now. But every time you turn on the Olympics and this guy is running in a race, he's going to be, bringing home some type of hardware. Andre DeGrasse. how this guy has managed to get better and better and better over the course of his career is so impressive because of how short these sprinters' windows are to compete. Then you look at him coming off of a very significant injury that he suffered, a couple years ago. It's difficult for these guys to really maintain a level of success. Kind of watching him run that last leg in the 4x100 meter relay to bring home gold for that 4x100 team that was probably the most decorated team in sprinting history. If you look at kind of how they won bronze, silver, and then gold at 3 consecutive Olympics, that's, again, unheard of. Andre DeGrasse showed up when it mattered. He didn't qualify for the final in the 100 meter, didn't qualify for the final in the 200 meter. Well, you got one more race to run. This is kind of your swan song. What better way to turn out your career than with a gold medal? So Andre DeGrasse is definitely if I got to put my money on somebody at one time a year, if I have a Andre DeGrasse running in a race in the Olympics, I'm putting my money on that guy to win something. So golf clap to the unsung heroes who show up when it matters and compete. And I mean, anytime you're synonymous with a specific event, you're doing something right.
And anytime you can take the attention away from Noah Lyles getting a microphone in front of his face, I will take that any day of the week as well, too.